We are live in Central Park. That's my home, somewhere over there. And this is Chaim Alevsky here. Chabad of the West Side. Chabad Family Programs. You can check us online. Check us up online. So, what an incredible, powerful thought from this week's Pirkei Avot. I just heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, hi Norton, be well. The Mishnah, the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot, says that when somebody learns something from his friend, he needs to honor him or her. And no matter what you learn or how much you learn, if you learn and it enumerates the details, if you learn Perek Echad, like one chapter, if you learn Mishnah Echad, one law, Pasuk Echad, one verse, Halacha Echad, one law, a small law, or Afilu Os Echad, even one letter. If you learn even one letter from a friend, Tzarech Linhod Bo Kavod, you need to honor them, treat them with honor. And the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot goes on and says, and we learned this, Halo Kal V'chomer, we learned this from the story of King David, who learned, and the words are Halo Shelo Lamad Mi Achitofel Ela Shnei Dvarim Bilvad, that he didn't learn anything from Achitofel but two things, only two things. And the wording Shnei Dvarim Bilvad, only two things, except two things. Then, but nevertheless, Nahag Bo Kavod, he treated him with honor. Whoops. Nahag Bo Kavod, he treated him with honor, and he called him Rabo, Alufo, Miyadelu. He called him his teacher, his master, his guide, or his informer, etc. So, the Rebbe takes this Mishnah and expounds upon a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Incredible thought, incredible idea, and it's very practical and relevant. And he says, the Baal Shem Tov asks the question, look at the beginning of the Mishnah, or this part, this phrase, and the end. In the beginning it says, if somebody learns anything from the friend, a verse, a chapter, a word, even a letter, you need to honor them. And we learned this from, second part, Achitofel, who taught King David nothing but two things, only two things. The word bilvad is pasted at the end of that sentence, that King David only learned two things from Achitofel, nothing more. So now the question goes on, and the Baal Shem Tov asks, the Rebbe asks and explains, how could it be that the Mishnah, which every word in the Mishnah is precise, like similar to the Torah, how could it be that the Mishnah uses the word bilvad, only, exactly, to the exclusion of anything else when it comes to teaching something from the Torah? We know that the words and even the letters of the Torah are God's. They're not ours. And they have a dynamic power in them, a nuclear power. They're infinite. And that's why the Rebbe says in the beginning of the Mishnah, when it talks about when we learn something from a friend, it doesn't say that word bilvad, only. It just says, if you learn something from your friend, even one letter, one word, one letter, you still have to honor them. But it doesn't add the word only one letter, or the word bilvad in Hebrew at the end. Because it's obvious that when you learn something from the Torah, you're not limited to that which you just learned at this moment. It becomes a foundation to more learning, and greater learning, and more insights, and deeper insights, and it expands, and it's a little building block that is a foundational building block upon which you build and you grow. The words of the Torah are compared to fire, they're compared over here to growth, that they grow. So why is it that when it comes to Achitophel's teachings, it says the word bilvad, only, that King David only learned from Achitophel one thing? Is a friend of ours. That was not planned. That's Ali. Okay, so that's the question. So the Rebbe goes on to a deep, beautiful insight into another concept from which we'll understand this one. And the Rebbe says, in everything in the physical world has its roots in the spiritual realms. So too, the concept of procreation, the union of a male and a female, starts somewhere in heaven. And up in heaven is the concept of a zachar and a keva, which procreate a male and a female, which was through their union, they give birth to something else. So it happens in the process of creation. It also happens when we learn something new, in the combination of teacher and student. When the teacher properly teaches something to a student, then that teaching doesn't remain limited to that teaching alone, but it's a foundation, a building block on many more teachings and many more ideas and much more wisdom. And so too, says the Rebbe, in the natural state of events, when biologically there's a male and a female and they're able to reproduce, they usually have children under the natural circumstances. But sometimes, says the Rebbe, we find that even a male and a female who seem to have all the necessary biological components, and the doctors can't find anything wrong with them, they just don't reproduce. Nobody knows why. Why is it sometimes that people do not have children? Asks the Rebbe in simple English. Well, he said this in Yiddish, but I'm doing a loose translation here. The Rebbe goes on to explain that the Talmud says that Shlosha Shutfin Ba'adam, there are three partners to mankind, to the birth of a child. There's the husband, the mother, father, and God Almighty. The process of procreation has the word creation in it, which is something that takes the infinite power of God Almighty. Humans cannot create. They can change the form from one thing to another, but they cannot create something new. In order to create, we need God. We need the infinite power, or Ein Sof, power of God Almighty to create. Says the Rebbe, sometimes when there are only two of the three partners, they cannot create something new. If the male and the female, the husband and the wife, have what they need biologically, they need to include God Almighty in the process, and they need to partner with God to create, partner with God in creation of their new child. And sometimes that's the missing element that prevents the child from being born. This too.
I fell when I wasn't even doing what you're doing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I want you to know because I fell on my jaw. It shot crooked.
Oh, yeah,
I got a concussion, and
Ay.
I wasn't even looking. I was
Wait,
just
wait, wait.
talking.
Sorry.
So, no, be
thank you.
careful.
I'll be very careful. Thank you for your.
You'll be like, okay,
Thank you for your concern.
without me, but,
I appreciate that.
yeah, so I'm like,
She's right.
yeah.
I've been doing this for a while, but I appreciate it. I will be
So
careful.
was I was
Okay.
learning and listening for about 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Take care. Concerned. Who's this? New York City residents. They're such nice people. See that? Okay. So, going back to our question. Oh, so the Rebbe says also this concept of male and female power of partnering with God, but also with teaching. Torah. When you teach something from the Torah, even though the Torah words are infinite by themselves, but it depends on the teacher who's teaching it to include, to channel that infinity, that power of the infinite into the words of the Torah for it to be properly received in the student. So here, says the Rebbe, Achitophel was a bad guy. You could look it up in the Tanakh. He's a bad guy, and though he was very, very smart, a genius, and he knew Torah, and the Torah that he taught was true, and King David benefited from it, and the whole world benefited from it in some way. But because it came from Achitophel, it didn't come from a source that also partnered with God. Achitophel didn't allow for the infinite flow of the Ein Sof, of the infinite God, to join in his teaching. And that's why Bilvad, that's why when King David learned from Achitophel, he learned Bilvad, only, nothing but the two things that Achitophel taught, and nothing afterwards. Unlike when you and I learn from our teachers who are connected with God, even if it's one word or one letter, it's never bilvad. It's never to the exception of all else. It always has room to grow because it's going to grow. It's going to give birth and sprout forth much more steady. And the Rebbe goes on and takes this relevance to us today, right here and right now. And the Rebbe says, I've been asking people for years, the Rebbe said, if you know anything in Judaism, if you know even the Aleph, one letter, go out and teach it. In the words the Rebbe emphatically says, as du weißt an Aleph, du kennst the Aleph, you know the Aleph, geh arus in gas and schrei Aleph, go out in the street and shout Aleph. And a person might ask, said the Rebbe, but that's all I know. It's just one letter. How is it going to help? So the Rebbe says it's not one letter. It's a dynamic force. It's a nuclear power that will blossom and sprout forth infinite more learning and connection to God, both in you and in the receiver. So if you know Aleph, if you know one letter of the Hebrew alphabet, don't be shy. Don't be lazy. Go out into the street and shout Aleph. Find someone who needs it. And then you can learn some more and teach some more too. God bless you. I am Oleski, Chabad Family Programs, right here in Central Park.